When I was in second grade, my class went on a field trip to the local science museum. After a few hours spent gazing at most of the usual fare, from ancient fossils to spaceship models to star charts, we got to watch a demonstration of lightning being conducted. After turning off all of the lights, the scientists told us to yell, "Wake up, Thor," as loud as we could. I was confused, but like any excitable 8-year-old, I followed instructions. The first time we yelled out for Thor, nothing happened. The scientist urged us to try again, to yell even louder. So together in one shrill voice, we yelled, "Wake up, Thor!" And as we did, we saw a flash on the table in front of us, and the lightning rod began to crackle with electricity. It was the first time in my life I'd ever seen lightning, or I suppose in this case, electrical sparks, with my own eyes. And I was hypnotized. At dinner that night, I asked my parents who Thor was. They were a little confused by the question and asked where I'd heard about Thor, and I explained that Thor made lightning come down and hit a metal rod at the Science Museum that day. And that was how I learned about the Norse god of thunder, the all-powerful deity who wielded the power of the elements and commanded the forces of nature. There have been many depictions of Thor in modern media, all sharing the same basic theme. A seemingly all-powerful deity wielding a mighty hammer called Mjolnir and channeling the power of lightning and thunder to bend his foes into submission. These days, the mere mention of Thor often yields references to Marvel's iconic depiction, but this Disney-fied deity bears little resemblance to the god of Norse myth. Santa Monica Studios' depiction of Thor in their 2022 title God of War Ragnarok heralds back to the more historical depictions of the character, but with something much more glaring at the forefront: his humanity. In the game, Thor is presented as one of the primary antagonists, second only to his father Odin. While Odin is ruthless and manipulative, Thor is a physical spectacle, Odin's muscle for maintaining his authority over the realms. But unlike Odin, Thor is emotionally volatile as a result of what is likely a millennia or more of abuse by his father. We as players are given a lens into Thor through hours of gameplay and story exposition, and his story is not one of bloody, unchecked conquest and an unhinged love for slaughter. Thor is, at his core, broken by years of abuse and a subsequent destruction of his self-esteem, all in the interest of consolidating his father's power. The reality is, for all his misdeeds, and there are many, Thor is the embodiment of fallibility among the Norse gods, and those flaws are what make him both a relatable and empathetic villain. Which leads us back to 2018 and the release of God of War, the narrative-driven reboot of the hack-and-slash video game franchise of the same name. The game's protagonist, Kratos, is a son of Zeus, and himself a god who has fled his homeland after destroying the Greek pantheon in a path of bloody vengeance. The 2018 game follows Kratos, now living in the Norse realm of Midgard, on a journey with his son Atreus following the death of his wife Faye, to spread her ashes from the highest peak in the realms. Throughout the story, we are introduced to a number of Norse gods and mythical beings such as Freya, Balder, Modi, Magni, and Mimir, among others. But the most famous of these Norse gods, Thor himself, remains conspicuously absent, mentioned only in stories and in the wake of destruction found across Midgard. This is entirely intentional, the objective being to heighten the player's anticipation and tension towards this character and his impending introduction. When first coming upon the Lake of the Nine, we are greeted by an imposing statue of Thor himself, a testament to his power and deeds which resonate throughout the realms. Of course, there is plenty more to find across Midgard as a testament to Thor's deeds, not the least of which is the frozen corpse of Thamor. It's revealed that Thor killed Thamor while he was searching for his son in the middle of the night following a heated argument. The massive frozen corpse is one of the game's quest markers, a massive and terrifying reminder of what Thor is capable of.
Their battle was fierce but decisive. A blow from Thor's hammer caused Thamor to fall on his own chisel, driving it straight through his skull. He landed upon a village, crushing its inhabitants, who are known for worshipping the Vanir god Njord. His fall released a great burst of freezing energy, cloaking the landscape in snow and ice for miles in every direction. Thor always took credit for planning all this, but the truth is the sweaty ball bag just got lucky.
But Thor's influence is also felt with much more immediacy, and this is most apparent after Kratos kills his son Magni. Thor, for whatever reason, blames his younger son Modi for Magni's death and savagely beats him for it.
Thor, blame me. Me, for what you did to Magni. My own father called me a coward.
Thor here is likely projecting his own anger and insecurities onto Modi, which in turn causes Modi to act irrationally which leads to his own death at the hands of Atreus. These moments all serve a wider purpose. Thor's ruthlessness precedes him. It's a narrative device meant to build the player's anticipation and perhaps stoke a little fear before their ultimate meeting. If so many people, hell, if the biome itself can be so affected by Thor, what could possibly await us when he finally comes knocking on our door? God of War 2018 ends with Thor finally making his entrance, and God of War Ragnarok begins with the exact same scene. There are flashes of lightning and thunder, Thor appears huge and ominous, and Mjolnir crackles with electricity. But the formidable guise of Thor ends very quickly as soon as we see him up close. Yeah, he's a big dude, clearly very powerful, but he's also tired. There are bags under his eyes, he has a wrinkled brow, his hair and beard are messy and unkempt. You can even just see in his eyes that Thor simply looks burnt out, far from the image we've developed in our heads at this point. And this is a very intentional narrative device. We are meant to be surprised by this, maybe even a little confused. This is it? This is what we were supposed to worry about? Homeboy just needs a shower and a nap. But what really disrupts the headcanon we've developed for Thor at this point is the way that he's treated by his father, Odin. Odin is very clearly the master puppeteer, the man pulling the strings on everything and everyone in Asgard, including Thor. We see that Thor is heavily subjugated by Odin, so much so that Odin has no issue delivering a landslide of verbal abuse in just about every interaction that they have on screen together. In just the first few moments after we meet them, Odin insults Thor's dead sons, Magni and Modi, in his conversation with Kratos.
Now, what you did to his boys. Self-defense. Dying is what we Aesir live for. And let's be honest, they were kinda useless.
Right there, right after he says it, Thor turns his head away and doesn't make eye contact with anyone at the table, a very clear sign that he is ashamed and embarrassed by this insult. But he does not act, he doesn't talk back, he doesn't in any way argue on their behalf. Thor is fully under Odin's control, and Odin knows this. He freely continues to mock Thor because really, what is Thor going to do? Yes, his reputation and his deeds precede him, but he is, as most everyone else in Asgard, a cog in Odin's master wheel. You can see in this initial interaction that Odin, even now, continues to tighten his grip on Thor, since it has been implied by this point that Thor is not drinking. Notice how Odin grabs Thor's cup and begins drinking it before slamming it back down in front of him. He actually slammed that same cup in front of him just a minute earlier as he was insulting Magni and Modi, implying that he's frustrated with Thor's sobriety. A drunk heavyweight is way easier to control than a sober one. We can see here that Odin is in the driver's seat, and Thor submits without question, without resistance. He lets him do all the talking, he barely interjects, he is there to serve a specific role. I am big and scary, and if you don't listen to my dad, then I'm going to turn you into a pancake. The whole scene is meant to show Thor for what he actually is. Subjugated, a glorified attack dog being kicked around by Odin at every opportunity, a display of his immense power and control. This narrative decision serves two purposes. It shows us that Odin doesn't need physical muscle and spectacle to be a terrifying adversary, and that for all of Thor's deeds, for all of the legend that precedes him, the source of that ruthlessness and brutality is rooted in resentfulness, anger, and a feeling of worthlessness. It's only after Thor and Kratos begin fighting that we start to see glimmers of who the God of Thunder really is. He is a slave to his anger, and he chooses to let that fuel him instead of rational thought, something he has been taught by his father.
Are you talking? Who told you to do that? You don't talk! You don't think! I think! You kill! It's a simple fucking concept!
No attempts by Kratos to reason with Thor are ever successful, because Thor never even welcomes rational discourse. He just shuts it down in favor of fueling the fight.
Dumbass! You think you can come here, become a daddy, get a clean slate? That ain't how it works. You're a destroyer, like me.
This is some form of a trauma response. He projects his anger to try and piss off Kratos and to prevent himself from having to process emotions that cause him pain. Fighting is an outlet for Thor. For Kratos, it is a final resort. Ultimately, Thor represents what the objective of the Aesir gods truly is: to create imposing, intimidating reputations for themselves through their deeds throughout the realms. But those deeds don't erase the fact that they have feelings. Their blood bleeds red, they love deeply, they grieve deeply, and they suffer just like anyone else. We get this imposing setup of Thor because the whole point is to question fact from fiction. We're supposed to take pause in the moment we meet Thor, sit with that tension, and try to balance what we know with what is in front of us, only to be snapped back to the reality that those stories, those legends, those mountains of corpses exist because Thor is fueled by real anger and real trauma. He may be flawed, but he's still a threat. He literally has the power to kill Kratos and bring him back to life. Thor can be a broken, subjugated person, and Thor can be an existential threat. Both of these things can be true. The existence of these dual truths forces the player to question the legends, to try and parse the facts from the fiction, and to remain curious about exploring who Thor really is. Yes, he's killed a lot of people, but why? We already know that much of his killing doesn't stem from a personal desire, but from direct orders from his father. Thor is committing these acts because he is inherently broken, because he desires a purpose, a meaning for his life. Earlier I mentioned how it's implied in our initial meeting with Thor that he's trying to abstain from alcohol, and for all intents and purposes, it appears he's succeeding. This would explain Odin's criticisms of Thor, calling him no fun and slamming the drink in front of him multiple times. It's well documented in Norse legend that Thor was renowned for his drinking and the sheer amount that he could drink. One legend tells of an occasion where Thor drank 3 barrels of mead and ate an entire ox in one sitting. This characteristic even appears to be true in Marvel's depiction of the character, especially following the events of Avengers: Infinity War, when Thor becomes deeply depressed following the loss of his friends. God of War Ragnarok's Thor is clearly an alcoholic who is struggling with his sobriety following the death of his sons. Thor has made the conscious decision not to drink when we first meet him, but following continued abuse by Odin and his open favoritism of Atreus, the person who played a part in the murder of his own sons, Thor falls back into drinking to soothe himself. Alcoholism is a disease, and you don't need me to define its characteristics, especially if you or someone you love has ever struggled with it. I myself am the adult child of alcoholic parents, and while I'm not an expert on the disease, I've learned through a lot of therapy and self-discovery what makes this disease so terrible to everyone caught in the crossfire. Midway through the game, Atreus, along with Thor's daughter Thrud, find Thor drunk in a tavern within Asgard. You can immediately see how devastated Thrud is to see her father has relapsed, and how ashamed Thor is to having been found this way. He's unable to make eye contact with her and tries to shift his actual body so he doesn't have to look at her. This ties back to Thor's struggle with shame, a feeling that causes a physical reaction in him, one that causes him to shy away from the source of that shame. He thinks so little of himself, he self-deprecates in front of the other patrons of the tavern, a literal god talking about himself as no more than a breathing battering ram.
Let it be known, the God of Thunder is good for 2 things: killing giants and pissing me!
It's honestly pretty heartbreaking. The God of Thunder is dragged out of the tavern by 2 teenagers because he's unable to even walk on his own. The powerful Aesir god is reduced to being slumped against the side of a building, unable to look his daughter in the eye or even apologize, other than to concede that he is a failure.
Mom and I are here for you, even when you're here. We love you. You know that. I just thought this was behind us.
I fucked up.
Yeah, you fucked up.
For Thor, this interaction is even more unbearable than those with his father because it's clear how much he deeply cares for Thrud. It's easy to see why Thor has relapsed. Alcohol provides a shield for Thor, a way to mask the pain of being so rejected by Odin.
I just don't get it. The mask, bringing the giant that killed my sons here. Why?
I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. Stop letting your wife think for you. She's clouding whatever's left of your brain.
This isn't about her.
No, it's about your limitations. Accept them and move on. Now go smash something, will you? Honestly, I liked you better as a drunk.
Being berated like this so regularly, it's easy to see why Thor thinks so little of himself. When he's drunk, he doesn't have to think. He doesn't have to feel the weight of his failures as a father and as a husband. He knows that this makes him easier to manipulate by Odin, but he doesn't care. He already has nothing going for him. It's easier to just numb the emotion and go along with it. My therapist told me that there are only 3 ways to interact with an alcoholic, or really any addict: to fight, to enable, or to leave. The only person who can get the alcoholic to stop drinking is the alcoholic themselves. Everyone else will fall into one of these categories, no matter what. Sometimes it's only fighting, sometimes it's only enabling, sometimes it's a combination of all 3. But it's always those 3. We saw Thrud exhibit 2 of these behaviors when she confronted Thor: fighting, the act of calling out his drinking and expressing her anger at his condition, and leaving, when she ultimately can't stand to endure the sight of him in that state anymore and removes herself. This isn't anything that Thrud is able to control. It's just the nature of interacting with an addict when the addict is someone you love. Thor's fallibility here rests in the fact that his sobriety is not linear, and this is true for many addicts. For a while, Thor was clearly making an effort, especially after the deaths of his sons. Thrud even implies this in the confrontation with her father. His sobriety showed a clear commitment to his family, his desire to be better than he has been. It indicates that he knows that he in some way held responsibility for what happened to Magni and Modi, and is trying to break that cycle of abuse. Alcoholics relapse all the time. There are not bad people for it. Thor is not inherently bad for relapsing. The measure of success is not how many times you relapse, it's how many times you dust yourself off and get back in the saddle. Now, to be clear, Thor is not a good person. He's hurt a lot of people, whether by his own volition or on Odin's orders. He concedes that he relished in murdering the giants, even if he was ordered to do it. He was a shitty parent who raised 2 shitty sons who made shitty choices, and ultimately died as a result of those shitty choices. Thor recognizes this to some extent. It's evidenced by the fact that he tried to stop drinking. He started trying to hold himself accountable for his own behavior. In the end, Thor's path to redemption, like his path to sobriety, is not linear. Despite his attempts to change and break the cycle, he reverts to channeling his rage and projecting his failures on Atreus and blaming him for the murder of his sons and attacking him. But when you step back to really look at the situation as a whole, Magni and Modi would never have been in the position they were in, would never have died, had they not been caught in the same generational cycle that Thor was in with Odin. The cycle that Thor himself helped perpetuate by passing on the same abuse to his own sons. In Thor's final confrontation with Kratos, we see Thor for what he truly believes himself to be, a mindless, thoughtless killing machine. And it isn't a surprise. He refuses to see reason from Kratos, instead completely leaning into his baser instincts and the raw anger that has festered in him unchecked.
We do not need to do this. We do. It's what we are.
For what is likely to be centuries or even millennia, Odin has talked down to, insulted, and berated Thor. After a while, it's no surprise that Thor would come to believe all those things about himself. And if he's so open and willing to call himself a failure, a good-for-nothing except killing and drinking, then he owns the narrative. It becomes the one thing he can control. Every insult he throws at Kratos, every strike of Mjolnir is a projection of his own failures and the narrative culmination of his own despair. The only thing that finally manages to snap Thor out of it is, ironically, his defeat. Kratos successfully neutralizes but does not kill Thor, and Thor's response is one of anger.
What the fuck are you waiting for?
This isn't a taunt or an ego challenge by Thor, it's a plea. He's bested. He can finally be put out of his misery, left to fester like he believes he deserves. But Kratos doesn't do that. He instead removes the knife from his hand and gives him something that nobody has given him until now, a choice. And Thor has absolutely no fucking idea what to do with that. And I think that is the moment that Thor is finally able to metaphorically look at himself for who he truly is.
Don't you know what I've done? Yes! But what will you do now?
Thor beats his chest here, not as a challenge, but in anger at himself. But he is finally taking accountability. He's finally acknowledging his misdeeds and the shame it has brought on him. Kratos responding with a question about what he will do now is an invitation. It's permission to move on from who he was and to be better. And honestly, who's better equipped to say that such a thing is even possible for gods like them? The change for Thor in this moment happens when he realizes that the violence of his past doesn't have to define his future, including who he chooses to be as a father.
No more. sake of our children, we must be better.
And I think Thor listens here because he knows exactly who Kratos is. The blood-hungry god of war that destroyed the Greek pantheon, that left a trail of blood and fire and destruction in his wake. Both Thor and Kratos share a history rooted in violence and war and bloodshed, and a history of being a shitty parent. But that moment, the act of Kratos sheathing his axe, leaving that legend and reputation behind him, shows Thor that change is possible. Being better isn't a distant dream if he's willing to look inward, confront his shame, do the work. It's why he lowers Mjolnir, even when he knows that he could easily kill Kratos in this moment of lower defense. He chooses not to. He takes the first step. Sadly, Thor's redemption is short-lived, and he's immediately murdered by Odin for refusing to kill Kratos, for finally making a decision for himself. Yet despite this, Thor's courage in making that choice is powerfully resonant. Thrud is there in Thor's final moments. She witnesses his newfound autonomy, his desire to be a better man, and she sees that he was willing to die for it. Thor knew the repercussions of defying his father. It's why there's no shock or surprise on his face when he's impaled. But this time, even as he falls to his knees, he's not ashamed. He does not look away from Thrud. He reaches out to her, choosing to spend his final moments looking at the person he loves, the person that believed in him, instead of the person who never did. And this redemptive arc is what solidifies Odin's downfall. His words are now hollow, empty, meaningless. It leaves him without allies against Kratos, and it leaves him without his own family. Thor's courage and legacy now belongs to Thrud and to Sif, and Odin can't take that away from them. Thor's redemption does not undo the harm he's caused, nor does it absolve him. He's a deeply flawed character, a man with his own demons that he failed to quell, but he's also a victim, just like any child subjugated to abuse by a parent. It leaves him ashamed, angry, vengeful, hateful. But these qualities are not innately a part of Thor. They were molded into him by Odin over a lifetime of abuse that he also perpetuated as a parent, even if he didn't mean to. We as people are also flawed. We also get angry. We experience shame. We know what it's like to hate and do harm. But it doesn't make us bad people. None of us can control the circumstances in which we find ourselves, but we will always be able to control how we respond to them. And it's never too late to make the right choices. Thor chose to be better in the end. He chose to stop drinking, even if his recovery was not a straight line. He chose to support his daughter's dreams. He chose to be accountable for his actions. Does that wash away his sins? No, but it shows that no one is so far gone that they can't change and start anew. History and Norse myth will remember Thor for the unforgivable destruction he wrought. But the ones who mattered most to him, who bore witness to his change, will carry that redemption forward. Thor's is a story that it's never too late to try. It's never too late to commit to yourself, and that the effort matters. So, what will you do now?